Hello, Econ. Just wanted to go over some notes with you and show you what we are going to be covering during this note series video. This right here that I have in front is the notes that are going to be posted for you. Pay special attention to what it's asking you to fill in, and then some extra things that I'm going to be talking about that are of importance. I'll make sure I slow down and go over that with you. So just wanted to make sure that you know that what I'm getting ready to go over goes with this. So your notes are actually right here, and I will also have this on Google Classroom. So let's go ahead and get started. All right, so this is Chapter 7, Section 1. We're talking about the different type of market structures, and no matter the structure, they're all going to have these characteristics. So there's going to be a certain number of firms. That may be there's a lot, there are many, there's a few, there's one. It's not a specific quantitative number. It's just going to be like a lot, many, unless we're talking about a monopoly, and that's just one. The type of product sold, how easily it is to enter or leave a market, so what type of barriers are in place. The amount of information that is given, so transparency, and then price control. Do these markets have control? These individual firms have control over the price or not? So that would go in 1 through 5 for your market characteristics. These different market organizations that we're going to be discussing are right here. We have what's called perfect competition, which means there are going to be many firms, and that they don't really have any type of control over the prices, and all of the prices are basically the same. Any firm can enter into this market if they choose to. Then the next one there is monopolistic competition. Again, there are many firms in monopolistic competition. They have a little bit of control over the prices. They have small differences in their items that they're selling, and there really aren't very many barriers to entry. Now, these next two, oligopoly and monopoly, these are going to be the companies that, when you think of these big, powerful corporations, they're going to really kind of fit into here. Not all the time, but an oligopoly is going to be a small number of firms. So when I think of an oligopoly, I usually think of like the cell phone market, like AT&T, Verizon, Sprint, T-Mobile. They have a lot of control over their prices. There's a small differences in an oligopoly between the firms, and it's really hard to enter into that market. So the market barriers would be high. And then a monopoly, from Monday and Wednesday, a monopoly is going to be just one firm, and they have absolute and total control over the prices. They offer some unique type of good or service, and it's really tough to enter into that market. So if we look back at perfect competition, and I'm really bummed that we don't get to do this game to explain what these different firms are, or different markets are, but perfect competition is going to be where we have a ton of sellers. We have a lot of different sellers, and they make the exact same types of product. So if you're like, agriculture is a big one, an easy one to use for perfect competition. The buyers and the sellers act independently. They have freedom to enter and to leave the market. The consumers are well informed, and there is no control at all whatsoever by the sellers. They don't have any control over the prices. So if one firm decreases the price, then probably all of them are going to have to do that more than likely, because there's no difference in the item. So why would you go and get the exact same thing for a much higher price? Well, you wouldn't. So if those firms want to stay in business, they have to decrease their price. Then the next one we have is monopolistic competition. And this is going to be the same. So where we have monopolistic competition, it says same criteria as perfect competition except identical products. Okay. Monopolistic competition is characterized by different product differentiation. Okay. Product differentiation. So in this case, we're going to see examples of this would be hotels, fast food restaurants, like a McDonald's, a Burger King, a Wendy's. They're all very, very similar. Hotels, like I just said, there's a ton when you go up and down the interstate. At each exit, there's always going to be quite a few to choose from. Gas stations, okay? So what we're going to see in this type of market, because these firms have just a little bit of control over their prices, they're going to have to distinguish their product with their advertising and that type of thing. So it's going to be this non-price competition, which means that they're going to have to distinguish themselves with style, quality, location, customer service. They're going to have to do something to set them apart from the competition so that people will go to them versus a competitor. Okay. The next one we have, is an oligopoly. I think I skipped a little something on your notes, but that's okay. An oligopoly is going to also have to engage in non-price competition, where they have to change the style, quality, location, ads, customer service, that sort of thing. But with an oligopoly, we're going to see just a few firms that dominate this market, and they have a lot of control over the pricing of things. And when it comes to product differentiation, there are small differences. So when I think of oligopolies, I'm thinking, okay, how about gaming consoles? Like those of you that play video games. So we've got, like, I don't know, is Nintendo even still around? Probably not. You guys have Xbox, PlayStation. I don't know, maybe there's something else. Then we also would have examples like for your cell phone, AT&T, Verizon, T-Mobile. If we're looking at streaming, who do you use to watch your shows? So there's Netflix, Hulu, Disney Plus, YouTube TV. Those would be examples. When we're looking at cable, there would be DirecTV, Xfinity, Dish Network. There's just a small number of players within that market, and they're the only ones that you really would go to. So they're going to be those that are considered an oligopoly. You could even think of, like, who do you use for a search engine? Well, I mean, Google. Is there anything else? Yeah, there actually are. But for the most part, people are going to use Google. Maybe there's some people that are still using Yahoo and Bing, but it's almost like Google has become a monopoly over that type of thing. But anyway, one thing, and this is really important for you to make sure that you know, is that oligopolies have interdependent behavior. That means that they depend on what the others within their market are doing. So it's also going to be a term that's called price leadership. So when one firm in that market changes their price, then the others are going to kind of follow suit. Or if they start offering this deal, then the others are going to follow suit. I remember when the cell phone companies started offering unlimited text messaging. Like when one company did that, then all of them started to do it. When they started, you probably don't remember this, remember when cell phones first came out, you couldn't talk without getting your minutes taken away unless you talked after 9 p.m. Well, one cell phone company went away with that, and so then they all did the same thing. Airlines. Okay, so airlines really are an oligopoly. When one says no baggage fees, the others are going to follow suit. So remember that airlines would be considered an oligopoly, but fast food would be monopolistic competition. Okay? All right. The next thing that's on here for you with an oligopoly is going to be the term collusion. Collusion is an agreement where these certain firms would get together and they would say, hey, we're not going to charge less than this. So everybody is at least going to make this amount. So let's all just charge this amount. That's illegal. It is illegal. It's very, very hard to prove that firms are colluding. It's hard to tell if they're colluding or if it's just price leadership where one firm does it and the others decide to follow suit. There's actually a case, a federal case, that was an antitrust case here locally with IMI and their concrete division. IMI and some other local concrete companies colluded and set a price at like $80 a yard for concrete. And they ended up getting caught. The FBI was involved, and the owners of IMI ended up going to prison for a while. I want to say the fine was like $20 million, something like that. It was a really, really high amount. So, and at that point, I think that was 2005. At that point, that was the largest collusion case, federal level. And that happened right here. So it's just a little tidbit of information. So the next thing we have, so we've talked about perfect competition. We've talked about monopolistic competition. We've talked about oligopolies, and now it's time for a monopoly, which you've had 2 days of a couple videos of monopolies. And I think monopolies are really pretty straightforward. It's one seller. They control the market. And we may think that monopolies are bad, but they're not always bad. So here's when it would make sense to have a monopoly. So this one is going to be called a natural monopoly. This makes sense for something like electricity, for local utilities, water. Would it make sense to have a bunch of water lines running from home to home with all these different companies under the ground? No, it wouldn't. Would it make sense to have multiple electric companies where electric lines are running every which way? No. Multiple sewage? No. So that would be an example of a natural monopoly. And so the government, the local government, would get involved and say, okay, this electric company, you guys, you have control. The local the local government would be in control of the utilities, and they would set the rate. So it's not like that company would be able to say, hey, we're going to make a killing, we're going to make a fortune. No, it would be regulated by the government. Okay, then we've got a geographical monopoly. And remember when we talked about elasticity and we talked about going out west and traveling out west, and those gas stations were like few and far between. And those gas stations could charge basically what they wanted to because they didn't have any competition and people were stuck. Either they bought the gas there or they got stranded. That would be called a geographical monopoly. So it's just in the absence of other sellers. If you are the only grocery store in a town, you own a geographical monopoly. Okay, so if you're the only grocery store, if you're the only hardware store, you get the idea. That's geographical. Technological monopoly. For this one, I would say the main thing I want you to know, and we've already talked about it, would be knowing what a patent is. So that's a technological monopoly. We've talked about how a patent gives a company or an inventor a set amount of time that they own that idea or that innovation. So a patent is going to be a technological monopoly that the government rewards those companies or individuals with for their research and development by not allowing anyone else to make that product until the patent runs out. Okay. Let's see. We don't need to talk about that one. A couple other things that I do want to touch on here. The government will get involved and they will say, all right, you are not allowed to merge together and become even more powerful than you are. So, for example, in the oligopoly, we talked about how, in the cell phone service, it would be like AT&T, T-Mobile, Verizon, Sprint. Well, at one point, AT&T tried to buy T-Mobile, and the government got involved and said, no, absolutely not. That would not work because you'd be way too big and way too powerful, and that's not what's best for the customer. So the government will get in and oversee that type of thing. They also did it in the late 90s with Microsoft when they were trying to bundle all their software, like I think it was Internet Explorer, and saying you have to have Internet Explorer for these different computers, and the government got in and said, no, you can't do that. So we do see some government oversight in making sure that these oligopolies don't become too powerful. We see it with the airlines where government has okayed certain mergers. And when they've said, no, these two airlines can't combine together because, again, too powerful. So I want you to know that. And then for barriers to entry, I want you to know that these are the three main things that would be considered barriers to entry. So regulations, if the government is putting a regulation in place and it makes it really hard to enter into a market, then that's a barrier to entry. Control of resources. So like De Beers Diamonds, they are a monopoly. And the reason that they're a monopoly is because they own like all of the mines where these diamonds come from. So they have the control of these resources. It would be really, really hard for some other diamond company to come in and like take control and find other diamond mines. It's just really tough to do. A third one would be high startup costs. If you want to enter into that market, well, you're going to have a lot of money, and that's just in some cases not feasible. And then I guess I said three, but there would be one more: technology. Okay. The technology is not available or accessible for many. So those four things, again, regulations, control of resources, high startup costs, and technology, those are the main barriers to entry. I think that's pretty much it. So I hope that you were able to get a lot out of this and get your credit for it by answering the questions through Edpuzzle. Thanks.